Picture a child being dropped off at school at 7:30 in the morning. Their eyes are barely open. They are holding a backpack that weighs more than a small dog. They will sit in a chair for the next 6 hours and be expected to learn. Most people who witness this scene assume it is simply how school works. They went to school at that time. Their parents did. It feels like a natural fact, the way sunrise feels like a natural fact. It is not. The schedule that governs when American children wake up, arrive, sit, eat, and leave was assembled across the 19th and early 20th centuries to serve the needs of industries that no longer even exist in their original form. The children were always secondary. The industries were always primary. This video is about how that schedule was built, who locked it in place, and which specific industries collect money every single day because the structure remains broken. We are going to name each one. To understand the school day, you have to go back to the mid-1800s. American public schooling was expanding rapidly, but it had no unified shape. Rural schools ran on an agricultural calendar, meaning they paused during planting in spring and during harvest in late summer and fall, because children were needed in the fields. Urban schools, by contrast, ran almost year-round because city children were not needed for harvest. The two systems were incompatible. When reformers began standardizing American education in the late 19th century, they had to choose a template. They chose a hybrid that preserved the long summer break from the agricultural model. That choice was not made for children. It was made for administrative convenience and because wealthy urban families had already begun using summer as a leisure season, a social norm imported from European elites. The long summer break was a class artifact dressed up as educational tradition. The daily start time has a separate and equally telling origin. As industrial manufacturing spread through American cities in the late 19th and early 20th centuries, factories ran on shift schedules that required workers to arrive between 6 and 8 in the morning. Parents who worked those shifts needed children out of the house and supervised before the shift began. Schools organized their arrival times to accommodate the factory shift, not the child's body. The school bell was, in a very literal sense, calibrated to the factory whistle. That synchronization was practical in 1910. It has no practical basis in 2025, yet the bell rings at essentially the same hour. Now consider what science has established about adolescent sleep. During puberty, the human brain undergoes a genuine biological shift in its circadian rhythm. The internal clock delays by roughly 2 hours. Teenagers are not lazy. They are physiologically prevented from feeling sleepy before 11 at night and from feeling alert before 8 or 9 in the morning. This is not a fringe finding. The American Academy of Pediatrics, the American Medical Association, and the Centers for Disease Control have all issued formal recommendations that middle and high schools should not start before 8:30 in the morning. Most American schools start earlier than that. Many start before 7:30. The consequences are documented and serious. Chronic sleep deprivation in adolescence is associated with increased rates of depression, obesity, impaired memory consolidation, slower reaction times, and higher rates of traffic accidents among teenage drivers. Schools that have shifted to later start times have recorded measurable improvements in attendance, grades, and mental health metrics. So if the evidence is this clear and has been accumulating for decades, why has almost nothing changed? The answer is not ignorance. School administrators know the research. Many school boards have debated it publicly. The answer is that changing the schedule would cost several specific industries a significant amount of money, and those industries fight back. The first industry is school bus transportation. The United States operates a school bus fleet that moves tens of millions of students every school day. The companies and municipal contractors who run these systems have built their entire operational logic around one fact. They can serve multiple schools in one morning, run by staggering start times, with high schools first, middle schools next, and elementary schools last. This staggered system allows a single fleet of buses to complete multiple routes with the same vehicles. If high school start times shifted later, the entire stagger would collapse. Contractors would need more buses or more drivers to cover the same geography. Their bids to school districts would rise. district transportation budgets would rise. The contractors have made this argument loudly every time start time reform appears on a school board agenda. The argument is framed as a concern for taxpayers. The mechanism underneath it is a concern for contract margins. These are not the same thing, and conflating them is exactly what the bus industry depends on. The second industry is after-school care. The gap between when school ends, typically between 2 and 3 in the afternoon, and when most adult workdays end, typically around 5, is not an accident of poor planning. It is a structural feature that has generated a multi-billion-dollar industry in the United States. Chains of after-school programs, tutoring centers, enrichment classes, and daycare facilities exist specifically to fill those 2 to 3 hours. Families in the United States spend substantial sums annually on after-school care. For many lower-income families, this is not optional spending. It is a survival cost imposed by the mismatch between school hours and work hours. The after-school care industry has an obvious and direct financial interest in the gap remaining open. A school day that ended at 4:30, or a system where school hours were redesigned to align more closely with working hours, would shrink the market these businesses serve. Lobbying organizations representing childcare and enrichment providers have consistently opposed schedule reform at both the state and federal level. They frame their opposition in the language of child enrichment and parental choice. The money trail runs in a straight line to the enrollment fees collected in the gap. There is a third force, less visible but equally consequential: the institutional inertia embedded in collective bargaining agreements between school districts and teacher unions. Teacher contracts in many American school districts specify start and end times, preparation periods, duty schedules, and planning windows that are tied to the existing bell schedule. Renegotiating those terms costs time, money, and political capital. This does not mean teachers oppose better schedules for children. Most teachers are aware of the sleep research, and many support later start times in surveys. The problem is structural. Unions negotiate on behalf of their members as workers, and any schedule change that affects shift length, duty periods, or after-school obligations becomes a bargaining item with financial implications for the district. Districts that have attempted start time reform have frequently found the process derailed, not by outright opposition, but by the sheer complexity of renegotiating interlocking contracts, teacher agreements, transportation contracts, and facility use agreements with community organizations that rent school buildings in the early morning and late afternoon hours. Those facility rental contracts are worth naming specifically. Schools in many districts lease gymnasium and cafeteria space to fitness programs, daycare providers, and community groups during the hours before and after the school day. Revenue from those leases flows back to school budgets. If the school day expanded or shifted, those revenue streams would be disrupted. The school building is, in economic terms, real estate. Its value to external renters depends on the school being vacated at a predictable and early hour. The children's need for sleep is in direct competition with the building's use as a commercial asset. Let us look at the few places where reform has actually happened, because understanding why it worked there and not elsewhere reveals the mechanism precisely. California passed a law that took effect in the 2022 school year, requiring middle schools to start no earlier than 8 in the morning, and high schools no earlier than 8:30. California was able to pass that law because the mandate came from the state legislature, overriding the local negotiation problem entirely. Individual districts could not be stalled by local contractor opposition or local bargaining impasses because the law removed local discretion. The lesson is direct. The schedule did not change when people asked nicely. It changed when a legislative body with sufficient authority overrode the economic interests blocking it. In most other states, no such mandate exists, and the local negotiation problem remains fully intact. Reformers in those states must simultaneously satisfy bus contractors, after-school providers, union bargaining units, facility leaseholders, and the political instincts of school board members who face re-election. The deck is stacked, and it is stacked deliberately. Now let us talk about the argument you will hear most often from people who defend the current schedule. The argument is that parents need predictability, Working families depend on knowing exactly when school starts and ends, so they can arrange their own work schedules. Any change, the argument goes, creates chaos for the families the system is supposed to serve. This argument sounds like it is centered on families. It is not. It is centered on the assumption that work schedules are immovable and school schedules must conform to them. That assumption reverses the actual order of priorities. A society that decided children's developmental needs came first would pressure employers to offer flexible schedules, not pressure sleep-deprived children to show up before their brains are functional. The predictability argument also ignores that the current schedule is already causing chaos, just invisible chaos. The chaos of a teenager who cannot pay attention in first period, the chaos of a child who falls asleep on the bus, the chaos of a family spending money they do not have on after-school care because school ends 3 hours before work does. That chaos is priced in. It is just priced in by the families, not the industries. There is a subtler layer to this story that rarely gets discussed. The current schedule does not just inconvenience children and families, it actively sorts them by class. Families with money can afford after-school enrichment programs. Families without money cannot. The gap between school hours and work hours does not fall equally on everyone. A child in a wealthy household who ends school at 2:30 and attends a well-funded enrichment program until 5 is having a fundamentally different experience from a child in a low-income household who ends school at 2:30, goes home to an empty apartment, and is unsupervised until a parent returns from a shift job at 7. The schedule manufactures inequality and then sells solutions to the inequality it manufactured. The tutoring industry is worth mentioning here as a specific beneficiary. The combination of early start times, sleep-deprived students, and condensed instructional periods produces academic underperformance that families then attempt to remedy by purchasing private tutoring. A sleep-rested child in a well-paced school day would require less remediation. The schedule creates the deficiency. The tutoring industry sells the repair. Standardized test preparation is part of this same loop. Early start times suppress cognitive performance, particularly in the late morning hours when alertness is still ramping up for sleep-deprived teenagers. Lower test scores generate anxiety among families, which generates demand for test prep services, which is a significant commercial sector in American education. The schedule is upstream of all of it. Let us return to the historical thread for a moment, because the 20th century added another layer on top of the industrial foundation. In the post-World War II era, as American suburbs expanded rapidly, the logistics of moving large numbers of children across long distances hardened the schedule further. Suburban school districts were built around bus routes, not neighborhoods. The longer the bus route, the earlier the first pickup had to occur to get children to school by the fixed start time. School sprawl made early mornings structurally necessary for transportation logistics, not for learning. By the time researchers began seriously studying adolescent sleep in the 1990s, the physical infrastructure of school bus routes was already decades old and expensive to redesign. This is how institutional lock-in works. A decision made for industrial convenience in 1910 generates infrastructure in 1950 that makes the original decision feel permanent by 1990. By 2025, the infrastructure has been in place long enough that questioning it sounds radical rather than obvious. The people who profit from the current system do not need to conspire in any coordinated way. They simply each advocate for their own interest, and their interests happen to converge on preserving the status quo. The bus contractor, the after-school chain, the tutoring center, and the facility leaseholder are not in the same room making a plan. They do not need to be. The structure does the work for them. This is the most important thing to understand about systemic problems. They do not require villains who twirl their mustaches. They require ordinary people with ordinary financial interests defending ordinary arrangements that happen to cause harm to people with less power to push back. Children do not vote. Children do not lobby. Children do not contribute to school board campaigns. Their parents vote, but parents are also exhausted and time-constrained and often grateful for whatever arrangement exists because rearranging it seems impossible. The system banks on that exhaustion. A parent who is barely managing the current schedule does not have bandwidth to attend school board meetings and push for structural reform. The people who profit from the current schedule do have that bandwidth. It is their job. Now consider the summer break specifically, because it functions as a separate but related economic engine. American children lose significant academic ground over the long summer break, a phenomenon education researchers have documented for decades and refer to as summer learning loss. This loss falls disproportionately on lower-income children whose families cannot afford structured summer programming. The summer learning loss problem generates enormous demand for summer school programs, summer enrichment camps, reading intervention services, and educational remediation at the start of each new school year. All of these are monetized. Many are operated by private vendors who contract with school districts or sell directly to families. Countries that operate on shorter summer breaks with more evenly distributed vacation time throughout the year show smaller gaps in achievement between income groups. The research on this is not new. The resistance to changing the American summer calendar is, by now, a familiar story. The industries serving the gap are more organized than the families harmed by it. The summer camp and youth program industry, which includes both nonprofit and for-profit operators, has a significant stake in the long summer break remaining intact. A shift to a modified calendar with shorter, more distributed breaks would not eliminate youth programming, but it would change the market fundamentally. Long-format residential camps and intensive multi-week programs depend on a long, contiguous summer to operate as they currently do. None of these industries are evil. That framing would be too simple and too easy to dismiss. The bus contractor is trying to run a viable business. The after-school center director believes in the value of what she provides. The summer camp owner genuinely thinks children benefit from his program. The problem is not the intentions of the individuals. The problem is that their collective financial interest is structurally aligned against evidence-based reform. When you are inside a system that pays you, it is genuinely difficult to see the system clearly. This is not a moral failing, it is a cognitive one. And it is exactly why we should not rely on the people who profit from a broken system to tell us whether the system needs fixing. So what does the cost to you actually look like in concrete terms? If you are a parent, you have likely spent money on before-school care, after-school care, or both. That spending was made necessary by a schedule that was never designed with your work hours in mind. You were handed a structural problem and charged individually to solve it. If you are or were a teenager, you spent years waking at hours your biology was not equipped to handle, sitting through classes during the portion of the day when your brain was least capable of absorbing information, and then being evaluated on that absorption through grades and tests. Your academic record reflects not just your ability, but the schedule's interference with your ability. If you are a taxpayer who has never had children in the public school system, you are still funding a transportation infrastructure built around the needs of bus contractors, remediation programs created by the predictable damage of summer learning loss, and health interventions downstream of chronic adolescent sleep deprivation. The broken schedule has a fiscal cost that spreads across the entire public. The reframe is this: the school schedule feels like furniture. Heavy, permanent, slightly inconvenient, but too large to move. It is not furniture. It is a machine that was assembled over 150 years to serve specific economic interests, and it continues to run because the people who benefit from it are organized and the people who are harmed by it are tired. The next time a school board in your district considers adjusting start times and the proposal is defeated, look at who testified against it. Look at which contractors submitted cost estimates designed to make the change seem unaffordable. Look at which industry associations sent letters. The defeat will not look like greed, it will look like logistics. That is precisely how it is designed to look. The child dropped off at 7:30 this morning did not choose that hour. Their body did not choose it. Their parents did not really choose it either, not freely, not with full information, not against any real alternative. The hour was inherited from a factory whistle that stopped blowing generations ago, kept in place by a set of industries that profit from the hour remaining what it is, and justified by a logic that sounds like common sense but is actually just sedimented history. The schedule is not a natural fact. It is a policy choice renewed every year by an action, defended every year by money, and paid for every year by children who have no vote, parents who have no margin, and a public that has been trained to see the cost as the weather. Unpleasant, unavoidable, and nobody's fault. And now you can see the strings.